Welcome to Moments with Marianne. I'm so delighted we're spending this time here today. We have a powerhouse show coming right up. Our first guest today is Andrea Owen, and she's here today to talk to us about her new book, How to Stop Feeling Like Shit. Now, Andrea is an author, mentor, a certified life coach who helps high-achieving women let go of perfectionism, control, and isolation to choose courage and confidence. She has helped thousands of women manage and deal with their inner critic and create the life they've been dreaming for. So let's welcome to the show, Andrea.
Marianne, thank you so much for having me.
It is such a pleasure to have you here. My goodness. I mean, and one profound book after another. So, gosh, this is just a game changer.
And it's so interesting lately. That's the dream, right? But it's been really scary and asking me and calling upon me to work on my own stuff that I write about and teach about. So it's been quite a wild ride.
Well, this is stuff that everyone is faced with and works on. So I'm so glad that you wrote this book. And I have to ask, what was like the main inspiration behind getting this book together?
It was a couple of different things happened. So when I talk about this in the book in the very opening introduction, I had my own rock bottom moment in January of 2007. I was divorced, and that was a very traumatic and dramatic divorce. I had then immediately followed into a relationship with someone who, at the end of our relationship, about 9 months later, I had found out had conned me out of thousands of dollars, had lied about having cancer to cover up a drug addiction. I was also pregnant with his child. And it was during that time where I had a sort of awakening, for the lack of a better word. And I realized that, for my whole adult life, I had looked to other people to make me happy. I especially put that pressure on the men I was in relationships with, and was severely codependent. I was also struggling with love addiction, and I woke up and decided I need to change my life. Like, this is about me. This is not about trying to control another person and, quote unquote, fix our relationship or fix him so that I'll be happy. And in those really beginning stages of learning what my symptoms and habits and behaviors were that were making me really feel like shit, to be honest, It were things like, the biggest things I struggled with back then were perfectionism, numbing out, and control. Those were probably the biggest things that my therapist had pointed out and that I started working on. And then fast forward, in 2014, I was certified. That summer, I was certified with the work of Brene Brown and her senior faculty. And for those people that don't know who she is, she's a researcher who has dedicated her life to studying connection and courage and shame. And when I came out of that program and started doing the work with my clients, again, this pattern reemerged of these specific behaviors. And Brene talks about a handful of them that are the most common in her research. What I found was that there was like a Pandora's box of behaviors that we all do.
Oh, yeah.
What I also learned that I think is worth mentioning is that this isn't about saying, okay, Marianne, here are the 14 behaviors that you're doing wrong. You need to fix them. No. It's about learning what they are in your life and what they look like so that you can see them quickly when they're happening instead of flying blind into them, so that you can choose different ways of being that honor who you really want to be. Because nobody has a value and a goal list of being a perfectionist or numbing out or self-sabotaging. Like, that's not what we want to do, but yet we keep doing it. So that's how this book was born.
Well, and I really appreciate that you talk about this, because there's not a whole lot of books that dive into this discussion, yet there's so many people that do it.
Right. Well, I think everybody does. Like,
well, I didn't want to point fingers, but I'm just saying.
I don't either like to make, big sweeping generalizations, but I think that even if you're not engaging in them now, there's been a time in your life where you have struggled with at least, a couple of these behaviors.
Yeah, it's something that people can resonate with in one degree or another, or they know somebody that's doing that. And it's like, then how can you best support somebody who's going through a time like that,
Well, I don't think that self-help can ever be prescribed to someone. Does it ever really go well when someone is really struggling in their life and you're like, you know what you should do?
Yeah, I got the perfect thing for you to do. Yeah, that usually does not work ever.
It doesn't. Yeah, everybody needs to go on. I saw a quote recently that said, give people the dignity of their own journey. And I think that those are some hard lessons when we really care about someone and we know, the book that will help them or the program that will help them. And yeah, you've got to go through your own stuff.
Well, I know in your book you talk about ways that people can really be kinder to themselves, and what are some of the ways that they can kind of manage that inner critic and recognize the patterns that are going on and start treating themselves with more kindness?
I think the biggest thing, there are a couple of things I like people to start with, but for the sake of this talk, I want to talk about really noticing when it's happening. For so many people, I think that it's their baseline to beat themselves up about certain things, whether it's things they did today or things they did in the past, or comparing themselves to other people. I joke in the book that compare and despair has become the thing to do on social media, right? We make up stories about our own lives and other people's lives based on the images and words that we see on the internet and social media. And so what I invite people to do is to make an effort to realize when you're doing it. And some people say, well, I think I'm always doing it. And I'm like, okay, that's great. I mean, great, not great, but good stuff.
At least you're realizing it. It's good to identify
realizing it. Yeah, and what I ask people to do, and sometimes this can be the most painful part, is to get out a piece of paper, and it's easiest, I feel, to break down the different areas of your life. So that might look like career, romantic relationships, friendships, your past, your future endeavors, your body and your appearance. Maybe parenting is an area of your life, and not all of your areas are going to have things that your inner critic gets on you about. So again, I'm not asking people to make stuff up, but if you have those areas where your inner critic is especially chatty, then write it down. And again, this tends to not be a very comfortable exercise, but it's imperative because I think it's Marianne Edelman, I think her name is, and she said you can't be what you can't see. And if you want to change, if you want to learn to be more compassionate and have more respect for yourself, then you have to know when it's happening. And that's where we start with this.
That's such a big deal because a lot of times it's so easy to kind of not pay attention to the things that are going on or how we feel about ourselves. And that inner critic runs rampant and it colors every area of our lives.
It does. And, it's really what I think I want the win to be. And I really kind of pound this into people's brains in the book that it's not about thinking, because I call it the ultimate ass kicker, when you realize how that first piece of awareness, when you realize, I don't want to say how bad it is, but how much, let's take inner critic, for instance, when you realize how much your inner critic is controlling your life and it really is in the driver's seat. What I hear a lot of times people say is, oh my God, I have so many issues. I'm never going to be able to contend with this. I'm never going to be able to change. This is so bad. And I just want to highlight that because that's normal if you feel that way. But again, it's really about knowing when you're doing it so that you can either just acknowledge it and move on to something else, which I'm a big fan of, or if you want to get, your master's degree in personal development, you can turn it into more powerful statements. And I don't always think that's the solution. I don't. Yeah. I think that, I say this in the book, I'm not a huge fan of positive affirmations. I think that we are too smart for them. If your baseline has been negative self-talk for so long, your brain is going to, the BS meter is going to go into the red when you start telling yourself how awesome and amazing and gorgeous and stunning you are when you've been telling yourself the opposite for sometimes decades. So I want to win to be for people that they're just aware that it's happening. First and foremost, turtle steps. And
be able to kind of identify it and then be able to move on. And your book gives great outlines on how to do that. you touched on this part when we first started talking. I'd love to kind of dive into this, and because I think it, like everybody does this, is just when people hide and protect themselves, and it seems like that's kind of more often the case that people do that because they feel like when they're kind of hiding out, they're protecting themselves from any hurt or harm that can come to them from other people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that we are, again, we're more connected now more than ever on social media, but we're so disconnected. And what that looks like, what you're pointing out is, I call it isolating and hiding out. So I'm not talking about self-care when you decide to, stay home for the night and skip the office happy hour. I'm talking about when you are in struggle, something's going on in your life, whether something happened that day at work that was upsetting, or you're going through a divorce or whatever. We've all had these hard times in our lives. Yeah. Instead of reaching out to tell someone what's going on, not so that they can fix it, just to, bear the weight, hopefully the relationship can bear the weight of that struggle, that is isolating and hiding out. So when I was in that relationship that I talk about in the book, when I was in that 9-month relationship where it was extremely toxic and unhealthy, I had isolated myself from all of my friends. I didn't check email sometimes for weeks at a time. I think I corresponded with a couple of my friends, but I did my best to try to cover up what I actually knew in my heart was happening in that relationship and what was happening to me. And to be honest, I think I was in like a high functioning depression at that time. And again, I just want to say that depression is a real thing, that I think that it's not a matter of won't, it's a matter of can't. So I want to just acknowledge that for a second. Yeah. But what I'm talking about is when we make a conscious decision to not reach out to someone. And I often hear, I'll talk to a woman and I'll say, tell me about your good friend, Martha. And would you want her to reach out to you if she was going through the same situation that you're going through? Or would you rather her just hide out and not tell you? She's like, of course I'd want her to reach out to me. And I'm like, well, then why do you think that you're exempt? Why do you think it's not okay? Let people love you. Let people help you. That was a huge lesson for me. Because I had, all of us, we get to a certain age and we have been brokenhearted. We have been betrayed. We have been hurt. We have had expectations of people where they have not met them. We know what that feels like. So we build up our walls and we say no more. And there's it can be complicated and there's healing with that, yes. But personally, I got to a point where I realized I had built up these walls, and then I was in this new relationship and I realized I wasn't letting people love me. And all this evidence of how that didn't work out. And I had to consciously look for new evidence, and it was all around me, that people did love me and care about me, and that I could lean on them, and they would meet the expectations that we have in friendships. And they were some hard lessons, but it is possible.
It's really interesting, when we get into these kind of spaces, how it's easy to shut down because we just feel like more pain's coming,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think there's something very real about that. Our brains are brilliant at protecting us. We become masters of figuring out, what's safe and what's not safe. And, it's that reptilian part of our brain. And again, I never tell people to stop comparing yourself to someone else, because I think that's what we do. Our brain sizes other people up. Are you safe? Are you unsafe? Are you someone I might mate with? Do you have food? It's this very primitive part of myself. So yeah. I think that I'm not a neuroscientist or a sociologist, but I'm fascinated with the topic, and I geek out on brain science because I think it's so fascinating. Human behavior fascinates me. And I think that I personally, like I was saying, I am someone who I had made up my mind that most people were unsafe. I'm safer. The only person, a piece of advice that my mom gave me, God love her, and, this will tell you a lot about how I became the way I did. My mom always said, the only person you can ever rely on is yourself. And she meant well.
Mm-hmm. I think a lot of parents have said that. I've heard that as well. And it's when you hear that, it's wow, it kind of shuts you out from everybody else,
Right. The message I got was, don't trust other people. You need to be, we romanticize this hyper independence, and I think that I know that so many of the women that I work with, they pride themselves on that. Like, I don't need no man and I don't need nobody to help me. I will do it on my own. And there's a saying in recovery, I say this in the book too, that says it works until it doesn't. And many of these habits work until they don't. I know that, my overachieving allowed me to graduate with honors from college. My perfectionism and control got me promoted. And again, they work for a little while, and then we get to a point in our lives where we're like, why does this feel terrible? What is going on? And it's these behaviors that we're doing.
Yeah, it's why am I not feeling good about all these things that I'm doing? It's because, deep down it doesn't feed us.
It doesn't. And then that's why the very last chapter is all about your values and not just figuring out what they are so you can name them, which I think is like, I say in the book, like, okay, that's just like naming a child and calling it parenting. That's not the same thing. So your values, like, I want to know, of course, what they are, but more importantly, I want to know what they look like on a day-to-day basis. Because I know you do not have a value around self-sabotage and control. I know you don't have a value around isolating and hiding out and numbing out. So what are the things that are important about the way you live your life? And do these behaviors fit into that? The answer is always no, by the way. Spoiler alert.
Oh, well, and, for the values part, of course, we want people to pick up their own copy of the book, How to Stop Feeling Like Shit. So we're going to, we'll leave that for the book, but I did want to cover, and you touched on this, the self-sabotaging, because that's such a place, here we are in this new year, it's such a place where people are kind of looking to make massive changes, and this seems to be an area that kind of goes along with the rest of our discussion, It's like, how can we first identify these things and then determine what we're going to do next?
Yeah, do you mean like identify the self-sabotage?
Yeah, identify the self-sabotage, yeah.
Okay. So, I love this one. Lately, actually, I've been doing this. I'll tell you about it. Okay, so what that looks like for people is when it can look like a few different things, but typically what it is, and I actually read this book after I wrote the book, but I think that Gay Hendricks wrote the book, The Big Leap, and I think basically he's talking about self-sabotage, and his theory is that we all have, he calls it the upper limit problem, that we all have this set point of happiness and success. I mean, this is obviously an unconscious thing that we have, and when we are asked to rise above that, whether it's your fitness goals or a new relationship or a promotion at work or up-leveling really any area of your life, we tend to sabotage ourselves to try to get back to where we were before. And he even his theory is that this is why we get sick. When we're called upon to show up in those areas of our lives, or we cancel, or we stop going to the gym, or we binge on food, or cheat on a partner when the relationship is actually going well, or don't show up to work, like all of these things that we do to really sabotage our happiness and success. And it makes no logical sense, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Oh, yeah. I've experienced it too. With this book coming out, I'm always very candid about what I'm going through too. And with my first book came out in very late 2013. And it's interesting, as I'm looking back on it, is I had one book event, and it was back in my hometown of San Diego, where I'm from, and I knew I have, lots of connections there, and I knew 90% of the people that would show up were people I knew and that already loved and trusted and cared about, and I could get a good turnout, right? Because it was safe.
Yeah, it's
other book events that might not turn out that way. But with this one, I saw it coming, and I was like, okay, so that's what I did because of that, and this time I'm going to choose something different. And it's really scary, to be honest with you, Marianne. Like, I'm doing 6 cities or something like that, and maybe only 5 people will show up, and I'm going to have to consciously work on that being okay.
Well, it's interesting, when we get to the point where we're like, hey, it's okay with how many people show up at this event, it's because the people that show up really need what we have.
Right. And I think that is a really beautiful sentiment. And not a but an and.
Yeah.
What happened, and I'm speaking obviously personally in my experience, I'm also under pressure from a publisher and a bookstore who's counting on me getting a crowd. You know, it's like they are making this effort. They would be really thrilled if 50 to 100 people showed up. So it's all these things that we have to contend with because and that can, you know, if I'm going to really jump in the deep end with you, that can kind of throw us into a shame spiral, a feeling not good enough. And like I know on a conscious level, like on a very surface level that, of course, I know that the people that are showing up are meant to be there, and it's going to be a really great experience for all of us. But what I have to do is watch for that voice that says, oh, the owner of the bookstore is probably really disappointed. And then I might fall into one of those behaviors where I start people-pleasing with that person and, like, sending them flowers or making them cookies, like to try to make up for my failure. You know what I mean? So it's like these types of things that I want people to watch out for.
You know, it's really easy because that gets into a point of people-pleasing as opposed to being okay with and you talk about this in your book, that's why I'm bringing it up, as opposed to just being okay with what is.
Mm-hmm. Oh, there's some hard lessons, right? Like being okay with what is.
I think we go through those all the time.
I don't know if I would even go on out a limb and say being okay. I think to me it's just acceptance and accepting the struggle and uncomfortableness that comes with it. Last year when I finished the book, I got the word surrender tattooed on my arm. And it's because for me, control is one of the behaviors in the book. That's the one I struggle with probably the most. And also, you know, my dad died when I was writing the book, and that's a whole other conversation. But I say that because grief was a huge lesson in letting go of control and surrendering. And also, you know, what I just described of being at an event where only 5 people show up and I'm wanting to make up for it to the book owner and the publisher and surrendering to like, no, I don't actually need to do all of those things in order to try to get people to accept me and love me and think differently of me and control the situation is what I'm trying to do. Control how people perceive me is actually what I'm trying to do underneath it all.
Yeah, and that's such a big piece, and your example relates to, you know, people can take that and relate it to any part of their life. You know, it could be work or relationships or, you know, family, anything. You know, it's interesting when we kind of dial that back and look at the things that we do. You know, sometimes we have to look and go, why are we doing this? You know, am I doing this to make other people happy and accept me? Or, you know, where is this coming from?
Absolutely. I think I say that a couple of times in the book, like when you're doing these kinds of exercises, because self-help, like, let's be honest, it can be a little overwhelming. It's like, where do I start? And, you know, what's the most important thing? And then like one thing will lead us to another thing and opening doors, et cetera, et cetera. But anytime you're doing exercises like the inner critic work or, you know, what I was just talking about, and more specifically, I forget which chapter I talk about that in, is like your perceived identities and how you want to be perceived by other people, because we all have those floating around in our brains. Break down the areas of your life. You know, how do you want to be perceived by your partner? How do you want to be perceived at work? How do you want to be perceived by your colleagues? How do you want to, you know, we all have that, and I think it can be less overwhelming if you do break it down to areas of your life.
When you work with people and in developing this book, when people break it down, does it make it that much easier for them to like tackle one thing after another?
Yes, and I think that because some areas of their life might be, you know, on lockdown. I have a client right now who her job is going really great, and so it's not an issue at all. So when I give examples, you know, I have to make sure that I'm making it clear for her and easy to understand. But yeah, it can be helpful to, and I'm sorry, I totally lost the question.
It's just, you know, I know. Well, hey, you know, having book tours and being busy with the new release of your book can kind of do that. But you know, it's just in your experience. That's okay. In your experience working with the people that you do, like what's one of the number one blocks that you see people really struggling with?
Oh, God, that's such a good question. Okay. And again, it's one of those, on any given day, I might give you a different answer. So my demographic, and it might be yours as well. I work with women, and they are high-achieving professional women, whether they own their own business or they work in some kind of corporate setting where they have a higher level position. They have all of their quote unquote ducks in a row. They are successful by the definition of success that our culture has created for them. So what I see them really struggle with is a lot of times it's boundaries, honestly, Marianne. Many of them have gotten to a point in their life where they're not necessarily people pleasers. They are okay with saying no when they need to, but it's in their personal life. So they can tend to say no at work fairly easy, but in their personal lives, they have a much harder time setting boundaries. And also, they numb out. They are at a place where many of them have unexpressed grief from either a marriage that has fallen apart in their past or a relationship. Maybe their parents have passed away, or their identity has changed because they had children and they're still a working mom. Like, there can be all kinds of different things, or they left their hometown, all kinds of different things that they deserve to grieve about, but have not given themselves the permission. Many times also for them, it's, I've had several clients who have really struggled with being an adult child. Their parents are still living, and their parents are not the people they always wanted them to be. And we don't give people permission to grieve that. We have expectations that were not met, and grieving the loss of an identity of a parent who's still alive is something that I work with women on doing. So these are just some examples, but all of that to say is that there's unexpressed stuff, feelings and emotions that they have not let go. They've shoved it down for years with work, with booze many times, with spending, with irresponsible spending, and they are at a point where I often say they have tied a knot at the end of their rope, they're holding on, and their palms are starting to sweat. Like, that's where they're at. And what I do is we work on many things, and one of those things is vulnerability, is allowing them to have these hard conversations with people that they trust the most. Their female friendships become very important in this work, and reaching out for help because they have tried most of their lives to do it all themselves, muscle through. These are very strong women who are just like everybody else, who have broken hearts and unexpressed feelings and emotions that they have worn being strong as a badge of honor, and they are exhausted.
I can understand that. I mean, there are times when I was working in the corporate world, especially, if you're dealing in a very male-oriented field, it gets really tough because you have to wear this tough exterior all the time, or at least, and it's interesting when you do, it gets exhausting.
That's so interesting, because what I have found is, because my corporate career ended when I was 30 or 31, so I didn't go that far in before I left and went to work for myself, but I work with a lot of corporate women. What I have found, and tell me if this is true for you or not, so not only do they have the pressure of doing their job and doing it well, but they have the pressure of kind of doing this like dog and pony show dance type of tap dance thing where because we've been socialized to be a certain way, just culturally as women. Mm-hmm. And so especially for women, I have a handful of clients who worked in male-dominated industries. And so it's like this double pressure of doing your job and doing it well as trying to fit into a place that doesn't necessarily make it easy for women to fit in. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting, because you get into these areas and you don't want to be like one of the guys. That's not who we are,
Right. Yeah, and it's not about that, but it's finding, I don't like this term, but like kind of finding your place and finding your identity in wherever you're at. So I'll give you a quick example. I have a client who got her annual review, and the next day we had a session together, and she said, in my annual review, they told me that, and it was in the list of one of her good qualities, that they were happy about. She said they said that I was direct, and I was like, well, you kind of are. And so she's Canadian, so so we really had to have this conversation, and I coached her around what does that mean for her, because when she heard it at the meeting in this conference room, she immediately went to that place of shame of like, oh, no, that is not good to be direct as a female. And so It's interesting, all these core beliefs that we carry around with us, whether we're at work or whether we're in our relationships, about being a certain identity means.
Yeah, it really is interesting how that all comes together. Well, my goodness, I mean, we could talk for days easily on this stuff.
I know.
I feel like we're just getting started. Yeah. But, Andrea, we will definitely have you back on the show again. And before we get going here, where can our listeners connect with you? I know your book was just released on the 2nd. We're very excited for you. So where can our listeners connect with you and also purchase your, learn more about your book and all that good stuff?
So in bookstores, I was out on January 2nd. I'm actually in the front tables at Barnes & Noble for the first couple of weeks in January, so that's exciting. And
Yay.
Also online, yay! Online, it's obviously you can order it on any online retailer of your choice. I'm at yourkickasslife.com, and the book stuff is at yourkickasslife.com/HTSFLS, which is, if you missed it, it's just the acronym for the book, How to Stop Feeling Like Shit.
Well, and so real quick, are you still working with people individually? I know you're insanely busy right now.
So, yes, I do take private clients. I don't, when this comes out, I don't have any room to take anyone until February, just because you don't want me as your coach right now while I'm traveling all over. When I come back home, and in February, and I'll be settled, I absolutely take a very small amount of private clients every year. I'm happy to talk to anyone and have them fill out an application.
Oh, yes, for sure. Well, Andrea, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show today and share your amazing book. We so appreciate it.
So, Marianne, thank you so much. It's been my pleasure.
Well, thank you. We are going to pause here for a quick break, and we'll be right back after these messages.
Internationally recognized and award-winning author Judy Goodman works and teaches outside the box of limited thinking. Working with people from every walk of life, her goal is to empower you to be the best you can be, no matter what the challenge is. Born with the gift of seeing beyond our normal vision, she has an extraordinary gift of working with every challenge. Teaching beyond conventional wisdom, her work is described as life-changing. Visit judygoodman.com. That's judygoodman.com.
Have you ever had the sense that your thoughts might actually be doing something? Ancient secrets of manifesting have been masterfully revealed in the award-winning book Manifesting 1-2-3 by Ken Elliott. For the first time, the author's experiences and stories in this book describe exactly how your thoughts can create anything. You've been doing this all your life, but it's never been fully explained for you until now. Visit manifesting123.com for more information today. Manifesting123.com.
Do you know that you can become a genius at any age? Do you know that you can change your life and create a brilliant life for yourself? Hi, I am Olympia LaPointe, an award-winning rocket scientist who you more than likely have seen on TED Talks, Impact Theory, and PBS. Check out my latest book, Answers Unleashed, The Science of Unleashing Your Brain's Power. Simply go to AnswersUnleashed.com books and check it out for yourself. You'll find the tools to help you create the life you've always wanted.
The highly acclaimed and newly released book, The Hand Part 2 by Lynn Van Praagh Grattan, describes the journey between a psychic medium and a family who lost a son. Messages from Beyond Eternity's Gate is of love and healing. For more information, visit www.lynnvanpraagh-grattan.com. That's www.lynnvanpraagh-grattan.com.
Welcome back to Moments with Marianne. I'm so delighted to be introducing our next guest, Amir Husain, and he's here today to talk to us about his new book, The Sentient Machine. Now, Amir is an award-winning entrepreneur and inventor based in Austin, Texas. As a founder and CEO of Spark Cognition, he runs one of the country's leading artificial intelligence firms, specializing in cognitive software solutions that help businesses and governments respond better to a world of ever-evolving threats. Amir was a founding member of IBM Watson's advisory board and is recognized as Austin's top tech entrepreneur. He speaks at numerous conferences, such as South by Southwest, and has been noted in many publications such as Fast Company, Entrepreneur, Wired, Forbes, and the New York Times. So let's welcome to the show, Amir.
Hi, Marianne. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it's such a pleasure to have you and on the show and talk about this. My goodness, your book is just here in perfect timing. There's so many questions that surround AI, and most people really kind of get a little confused when it comes to that.
That's right. I mean, AI is certainly the topic of the day, and actually, in my view, it's really the topic of the century. I think artificial intelligence will have such tremendous impact across so many different areas of endeavor, from the economy to the military to, frankly, even society. And that's just a few of the things that I cover in my book. I think it's also a great opportunity to really think about some fundamental existential questions. Who are we? What do we want to do? And what is our value in an age when technology and artificial intelligence and smart machines can begin to do some of the things that we've associated with human labor and human effort. So those are big questions. And that's a few of the topics that I do cover in the book.
Yeah, your book is very thorough, and I think it'd be great for us to kind of just start a little bit at the beginning here. For people who are, have heard of AI, but sounding more like science fiction than reality, why don't you explain a little bit of what that is?
Absolutely. So artificial intelligence really is a part of computer science, and it's a science or a field that concerns itself with intelligent algorithms, ways in which you can produce smart machines. And, traditionally, by the way, artificial intelligence is not a new development. In fact, the science was kicked off formally in the 50s by Marvin Minsky and John McCarthy, who were known as the fathers of this field. And initially, the expectation amongst the computer science community was that it wouldn't be that difficult to get a machine to act intelligently and to do the kinds of problem solving that human beings did. But as time went on, researchers discovered that, ironically, things that we've thought of traditionally as being really difficult, or things that we've thought of as very complex, for example, complex mathematics or playing the game of chess in a really sophisticated way, those ended up being easier for computers to replicate and for artificial intelligence software to replicate. And at the same time, things that a 3-year-old child can do, which is to, be curious about the environment and discover new knowledge and have the sense of intrinsic motivation. Those are things that it actually turned out that it was very hard for software to do. So artificial intelligence overall is a field that concerns itself with building smart machines. And one of the interesting things about this is that that's been a moving target. So before we built software that could play chess, we thought that chess playing was a really intelligent activity and something that required, human-level intellect to achieve. But then when, with Deep Blue, which was the IBM computer in the 90s that was able to defeat Garry Kasparov, the human grandmaster, a lot of people started saying, well, chess is just calculation. It doesn't really require a high level of smarts. So what if a computer did it? So in the artificial intelligence community, there's been a little bit of a moving target as to what we perceive to be, quote unquote, intelligent activities. So that in a nutshell really is what AI is all about.
Well, and you kind of answered my next question for you, is just how AI compares to human intelligence. And you can see with the examples that you've given, how you're right. It is like a moving target. We keep we keep moving the finish line.
Oh, absolutely. And, the good news about that, though, is that, you move the finish line when you achieve something. And lately, in particular, in the last several years, artificial intelligence has had a bit of a renaissance. As I mentioned, the field is not new. The field has been around since the late 50s. But really, in the last few years, we've made some breakthroughs with new capabilities and algorithms and technologies, particularly deep learning, which has been in the press quite a bit over the last couple of years. And specifically, we've made some breakthroughs in solving perception problems, so looking at an image and being able to figure out what objects are in this image, being able to take audio recordings and to be able to transform them into text transcripts, so speech to text, language translation, going from one language to another. These are some of the activities where we've had tremendous successes, and the accuracy of AI algorithms, machine learning algorithms in all of these areas have improved drastically. So AI is, sort of having a bit of a renaissance now, and there's a lot of optimism and a lot of hope for what it'll achieve in the years to come.
I think most people don't really understand how much AI helps us, in just our daily lives. And you've given some just fabulous examples of how that is. How does it also impact our healthcare?
Well, healthcare, I think, is certainly an area that's ripe for huge applications of artificial intelligence, and it's one of the most positive applications of AI, in my view. In the book, I describe this idea of a bucket illness. In other words, there are many types of illnesses that are really grouped together because they have common symptoms. We don't really know whether these symptoms are one disease or a result of 7 different diseases that simply hide beneath the same set of symptoms. And one example that I give in the book is, I myself suffer from cluster headaches. That's something that a lot of people are not familiar with because it's not very common. And usually, just given the name of the condition, headache, people think, oh, well, it's just a bad headache. It's actually about the most extreme kind of pain that you can experience. It totally maxes out the pain receptors in your brain, and most of the time you end up, fainting because of an abundance of that kind of pain stimulation. At the same time, colloquially, it's referred to as a suicide headache. I mean, it's that bad. So the manifestation of this condition is this kind of extreme, beyond description type of pain. But at the same time, it happens probably because of many different reasons. I mean, it might even be that what is referred to as a cluster headache may be many different illnesses or conditions that manifest themselves in this particular symptom, which is crippling pain. Now, we don't really know because not enough people suffer from this condition, and we have to reserve the best of our medical talent, the best of our research talent, and focus that on problems that afflict a larger number of people. And while that is the rational choice, it doesn't take away from the fact that people that suffer from this long tail of illness, of which cluster headache is only one example, but there are many more. In fact, what is referred to as IBS or IBD, which are, intestinal conditions, these are also, again, symptoms more than diseases. And we don't really have the capacity within the research community at the moment to devote the best of our talents to each one of these relatively unknown, diseases. And so artificial intelligence really gives us the capacity to interpret data, interpret what we gather from tests, interpret, medical big data, and come up with hypotheses for why these things might be happening and why, even though the symptoms are the same, really what's causing them might be different. And really, as a decoder for human life, AI has great potential. So that's an area that I'm personally very excited about, and it's something that I discuss in the book extensively.
Yes, you do. You have a great chapter on that, and I enjoyed it very much, because there's a lot to get excited there about, especially in regards to AI. And it's interesting because when we listen in the news, we have other luminaries, like Elon Musk, who they're kind of warning against AI. And so I think people get a little confused on what it can, really do as far as benefiting us.
Well, the benefits are tremendous. And at the same time, I will say that I don't dismiss concerns. If you kind of think about it around AI, there are two big existential concerns. One is that, the Terminator scenario, it'll kill us. And the other concern is that it'll take our jobs away. And it'll reshape the economy to the detriment of most of the workers in the economy. Now, the reality is that, a level of artificial intelligence that is superior to human beings in a general sense, what's called artificial general intelligence, is not going to come about next Thursday. I'm, again, a researcher in the area, and I understand where we are at the moment, which is a very good place, and we're making great progress, and real applications are making their way into the marketplace that are making a real difference. But those are all examples of what's called artificial narrow intelligence. In other words, artificial intelligence capabilities in a specific domain or a specific field of expertise. And now in those fields of expertise, those AI capabilities can be better than the best human. The game of Go, the game of chess, being able to identify certain objects and images, certain kinds of handwriting recognition. These are all areas where artificial intelligence in those narrow domains has exceeded the capacity of human practitioners, even today. But in a general sense, human intelligence is able to do, the same human being can be an athlete and can sing songs and can write poetry and can also, do math calculations. So that kind of general expertise and the ability to learn generally is something that still eludes the field of artificial intelligence, and we're working hard to get there. So I think that level of sophistication where a mastermind AI or artificial superintelligence takes over the world, I think that's not, again, happening imminently. And really what's required in order to deal with concerns around that potential, breakout scenario is to invest in what we call safe AI research and explainable AI, where AI decisions are no longer just a black box. The system can explain why it arrived at a certain conclusion. And with safe AI, where we have safeguards in place that malfunction or some kind of a hacking attempt to take over an intelligence system can be prevented. So those are areas that require a lot of investment. And I'll stop here before we get into the economic aspects. But to me, AI does have a lot of potential. And once you make a certain level of progress in science, the genie of progress cannot be put back into the bottle. So I think a lot of progress is inevitable. If Einstein hadn't discovered the special theory of relativity, somebody else would have. It may have taken an extra 10, 15, 20, 30 years, but I believe that progress is inevitable. And in that sense, there's no point in hiding from that potential. One should try and leverage it as best as one can. And in this particular case, I think investments in safe AI, explainable AI are part of that process.
Well, and I agree with you 100% because there's so many brilliant people that continue to show up and bring great, research and just different ideas to the table that allows us to go ahead and move things forward. And one of the things that I think that I'd love to touch on with you is cybersecurity, and that seems to be such a huge thing. There's so much going on. How will AI assist us in just, seeing that we are more secure, not just with our computers, but just with like our credit cards in our everyday life?
Absolutely. So, the field of cybersecurity is becoming really, really complex, and this is happening because of three principal reasons. First of all, our device footprint, the 4 billion or so laptops, phones, and desktop computers are no longer the only targets. As we continue to build this Internet of Things, where every device, from your microwave to your fridge to your autonomous self-driving car, is all connected to the Internet, you have this potential for 100 billion connected devices in a couple of decades. And with that, you have such a massive footprint that thinking that human beings and IT practitioners can defend that kind of footprint against sophisticated threats is, I think, it's ill-advised to take that approach. So one is this expanding footprint. The second challenge is that cybersecurity has been, to a great extent, weaponized. And we now see some forms of artificial intelligence, actually, and smart tools being used by hackers to automatically generate and morph different types of threats. So every day you see dozens of thousands of new types of attacks. And that's just so much sophistication packed into such little time that, again, finding all these new ways of how hackers are coming up with mechanisms to undermine IT security for a team of human IT practitioners is becoming more and more difficult. So the increasing sophistication is the second challenge. And the third challenge is that cybersecurity is now no longer about people stealing your credit card or taking over your identity. It's actually about damage in the physical world with systems like self-driving cars and systems that can take physical action as a consequence of that compromise. Mm-hmm. We also see cybersecurity morphing into kind of this information warfare. Again, we're in the middle of an investigation as to whether our last election here in the U.S. was shaped in any way by, robots on Twitter that were spreading one message versus the other. And so if we're at a point now where the process of democracy can be hacked, then clearly much more is required in order to defend all of these systems, our self-driving cars, our bank accounts, and frankly, our democracy and our electoral process. So given the increase in both the volume and the complexity of the threat, in my view, really one of the only viable strategies to defend against this this threat landscape is by investing in artificial intelligence-based tools that can find anomalies, that can automatically diagnose malfunctions and determine if this was because of a compromise or because of a natural failure, and to be able to identify on the Twitterverse, if you will, in social media space, actors that are attempting to influence large populations of people in a way that would undermine an electoral process, as an example. So these are things that it's very difficult for people to do simply because they're dealing with both the volume and increasing complexity. And I think it's much more viable to employ artificial intelligence to defend against these particular threats.
Yeah, I would agree with you, and it's very interesting from just as a layperson and the things that I've understood in regards to what's going on with cybersecurity, and there's so much more, as you're talking about, that could be attacked. I mean, you talk about our power grids. The election was a big thing to look at. I know Facebook, there was some issue there as well that pages were set up from foreign governments. So you look at all this stuff, and we just don't have the manpower to be able to do it. That's why AI comes up as such a great resource.
Precisely, and you talked about the grid, and let me share with you that, within the energy community, one of the big challenges that we're facing is that there's a shortage of skilled labor. A lot of the people that were maintaining our electrical power generation infrastructure are heading towards retirement, and we don't have the same number of mechanical engineers and vibration analysts and all the different types of skills that you need to really man that workforce being replaced in sufficient numbers. So we have a skills gap in that area. And right at the time that we have this skills gap, we also have this emerging cyber threat against that physical infrastructure. So these are some areas where, again, applications of AI are just so perfect because they're bringing in that ability to very rapidly learn from data, identify problems, and address them in the absence of, the right amount of human skilled labor.
Well, and I know I'm kind of moving around a little bit here because I was so interested in, your views and your just your wisdom in regards to cybersecurity. I had to hop over there real quick. But when we talk about, you touched on this briefly in regards to the financial markets. And, how is AI helping us to make sure that, that the markets stay the way they are and we're not, again, with the cyber issue, having issues being hacked and having either an inflated market or one that's going south that isn't really true?
Well, artificial intelligence in the financial markets, in my view, is going to revolutionize a lot of different things. You pointed out, again, cybersecurity for banking and for secure transactions. The ability to do things in a secure way on a well-defended network is absolutely crucial. So that's one area. But then beyond that, the kinds of spurious trades that are done to game the system or artificially pump up the price of an asset and then unload the asset, that kind of, malevolent sort of trading pattern, that's another area where large stock exchanges are applying artificial intelligence technology to be able to detect that kind of malevolent behavior. In fact, my company, Spark Cognition, is involved with some of the largest exchanges in the world to protect against that kind of threat. But then beyond that, in the area of investments, artificial intelligence is being used in the capacity of what are known as robo-advisors that can look at your background, your savings, your job, and come up with a retirement plan for you, kind of like how human financial advisors used to do that, and manage your portfolio and allocate funds and make recommendations. So robo-advisors are one area where nascent AI, very basic AI, is already being employed, and over time that will only become better and more sophisticated. And we have the largest hedge funds, which have tens of billions of dollars under management, now looking at the use of artificial intelligence to automatically allocate funds and to identify new and profitable trading strategies. So across financial services, there's a whole plethora of use cases and opportunities to apply AI, and that's very much happening now.
Well, and I would think that it would be so much more efficient and more on target when it comes to investing, because you take out the whole human factor where there could be errors.
Well, absolutely. I think one of the interesting things that I talk about in the book also is that there are many sources of cognitive bias in the case of human beings. We are amazing in our decision-making potential, and when we get it right, we definitely get it really right. But at the same time, we have to recognize that we're not perfect, and there are many situations, some of which are simple to remedy, but nonetheless, they impact our decision-making ability very seriously. And one of the examples there is that researchers have found that a simple lack of glucose causes us to default to fast decision-making where we don't properly think through a scenario. So, for example, they tested this in judges that were adjudicating whether or not they would let a prisoner out on parole. And when you got close to lunch and glucose was running out, judges started defaulting to rejections. Now imagine the impact of a decision like that. Without the judge really even knowing that he or she is doing this, they're not properly looking at the entire application on its merits and are defaulting to just perpetuating the status quo, which is that the prisoner is in prison, so let's just keep him there and let's not make a change, because making a change requires a greater amount of effort. And at that point where you're lacking glucose, you can't do that. So after lunch, however, the whole process changes. And now, they start thinking through the application again. And this has been measured. In fact, it's covered in a book by Daniel Kahneman, who's a Nobel laureate. and he talks through this example. So this is just one example of a cognitive bias. But we get tired. We get fed up of doing the same thing over and over again. We lose vigilance. There's lots of issues with our decision making, and certainly artificial intelligence can augment that decision making in the near term, and in some cases replace that decision making in the medium to long term.
Well, it's interesting how something so small can make such a huge impact and affect other people's lives. And so, of course, we would want to take that into consideration, and maybe that's something that later on can be an automated thing where it's there's not so much the human bias involved that we're not even aware that we're having.
Exactly. And, of course, people worry about bias in artificial intelligence algorithms also. And, in fact, a lot of work is being done in identifying the sources of that bias, which ironically almost always turns out to be the data that you feed the algorithm to train it. And who produces that data, or what is that data coming from? That data is coming from the human world. So, artificial intelligence can learn some of the biases that we practice, unfortunately. But to me, that's an opportunity to really call those biases out and to augment human decision-making, again, in the near term. I don't think that we're going to move to completely automated courts in the short term, but I think once these systems show themselves to be more accurate and more capable and more fair, then at some point in the future, the population of the time, the citizenry of the time gets to make that call. And I think those are all things that in this century, those are decisions that we will, as the human race, be faced with and will be making.
And that's where you see humanity going from here with AI, is really kind of making these decisions on what these machines are going to be doing, not only for us, but helping us do.
Exactly, and I think that there's a lot of angst around, again, AI rendering us useless, but I don't look at it that way at all. I look at it as the epitome of what we can create, because in all of our creation myths, we talk about, for example, the advent of man and Adam being this creature that was, for the first time, given agency, given the ability to make decisions, given the ability to acquire knowledge. And that is a great example of the Creator's creation. So in a similar way, now that we're at the cusp of being able to create things that can think for themselves, we need to look at that as a great achievement and as something that can help us in the future and expose us to ideas and expose us to findings and discoveries and science that we on our own couldn't achieve, as opposed to that being, sort of this cause for existential angst. I look at a future that has humans, surfing what I call the ideascape, this potentially infinite landscape of ideas that are yet to be discovered, alongside artificial intelligence that is also making its own discoveries. And the nice thing about an infinite landscape is that if AI thinks 10 times faster or 100 times faster or 1,000,000 times faster, it doesn't matter, because you can work as fast as you like, but if you have an infinite landscape to explore ahead of you, there'll always be more potential, there'll always be more opportunity for both you as well as other forms of intelligence that you are involved in creating. So to me, I think this is a renewal of our potential as the human species and not a means for or a cause for existential angst.
I would agree with you. I mean, I think there's so much to be excited about with our future with AI. Of course, there are some safeguards that we have to have in place, as you discussed earlier, and people can pick up your book, The Sentient Machine, and learn more about the discussion on that. But it really puts into place how we can really move forward as just as a people, and not, I'm sure we look 100 years back from where we are today, and people would think we're kind of in the Stone Age a little bit.
Well, that's the thing about progress, and that's what makes the future so exciting. I think there's always the potential for the downside, but that doesn't mean that we stop moving forward.
Yeah. Well, and so, Amir, where can people connect with you and be part of your community? Why don't you share with us a little bit about your company?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, I'm very active on social media, and I usually interact with folks that have interesting questions. So I'm on Twitter, Amir Husain, AmirHusain _TX, as in Texas. And then I'm also on LinkedIn. I'm happy to connect with folks there. The book is on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, in your neighborhood bookstore. It's published by Scribner. And there's also an Audible audio version. Again, it's The Sentient Machine, and it's available online or in your neighborhood bookstore. And then as far as the company, so Spark Cognition, which is a company that I've founded, and I'm the CEO of this company. It's focused on artificial intelligence, based in Austin, Texas. And we've applied artificial intelligence to, national security and defense. We work with the Air Force. We work with the Navy. We work with the DoD in general on a number of applications of AI in that space. We're also very active in the energy community. So, for example, British Petroleum and many of the other super major oil and gas companies are clients. And some of the largest manufacturers of oil and gas equipment, like Flowserve Corporation and Dover, are also clients. The largest aviation company, Boeing, is both a client and an investor in Spark Cognition. And then finally, in the financial services space, again, the London Stock Exchange, Chicago Mercantile Exchange, these huge trading platforms, they use Spark Cognition technology also, as well as numerous others. So we're really at the cutting edge of artificial intelligence and are pursuing the developments both in advancing the science as well as practically applying it in numerous different areas.
So exciting. Well, I'm following you on social media, and I highly suggest everyone do the same and also pick up their own copy of the book, The Sentient Machine. Amir, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Thank you very much, Marianne. It was my pleasure.
Well, we're at the end of our time today. I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne. And remember, make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Moments with Marianne airs every Thursday, Friday, and Sunday at 8 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Mountain Time. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.